This time, I will reconvene into open session this meeting of the Arlington Independent School Board of Trustees for April the 8th, beginning at 7:17 p.m. We will start our meeting with an opening ceremony. Please join Ms. Polly Walton in leading us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
For those in attendance, please silence your cell phones and electronic devices to avoid any disruptions around you. And now, if you would please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. So the first item on our agenda is our presentation for our Students of the Month. Can I just get a thumbs up that we are ready to move forward?
Good evening. Thank you, President Mays, Board of Trustees, and Dr. Cavazos for allowing me the opportunity to introduce to you Chisholm Akpum, April Student of the Month for Sam Houston High School. She participates in Fort Worth Youth Orchestra, Sam Houston High School Theater, volleyball, and book club. She plans to study computer science at either the University of Chicago or Texas Christian University while pursuing arts and language learning. One of her favorite moments was playing her violin alongside the Fort Worth Symphony Orchestra at Bass Hall last February. She wants to become a philanthropist in the future and speaks at least 5 languages fluently. She is almost there as she speaks English, Spanish, Igbo, and Japanese. Congratulations, Chisholm, for being selected April Student of the Month for Sam Houston High School. Thank you.
Congratulations. Chisholm, congratulations to you. Thank you very much also for Principal of Sam Houston High School, Mr. Juan Villarez. Thank you very much. So Chisholm, would you like to say something this evening?
I would like to thank everyone who helped me get here, from my family at home to all my friends and my classmates and my teachers and staff at school. Even though we're all virtual, we were able to keep our community going, and I'm very grateful to have had that at Sam Houston. So thank you for everyone.
Well said, well said. Thank you very much, and congratulations to you for being the Student of the Month.
Thank you.
Thank you. That is awesome. Okay, next on our agenda is our public hearing, which we have none this evening. So we will move to our open forum for agenda items. As stated on the posted agenda, members of the public who desire to address the board regarding an item on this agenda are required to register by sending an email to the Superintendent of School Secretary, lbenjami@aisd.net, no later than 3 p.m. the day of the board meeting. Mrs. Benjamin, do we have any requesters registered to address the board regarding agenda items? No, ma'am, we do not. Okay, thank you very much. We will continue on our agenda with our action item. Our action item this evening is consider notice of election. Dr. Cavazos.
Thank you, President Mays. And this evening we bring the notice of election for your consideration. And just a summary on a part of that. As part of the notice, we also include voting location sites. And that's customary that we do that. And so I want to first thank Lisa Benjamin, who is our elections coordinator and works through all of these issues. So thank you, Lisa, for your work. But I want to note that that we had a late request from the city of Arlington to use 3 of our sites, in addition to what you see on your list, to use 3 of our school sites. And it was a late notice And that's still being worked out with Tarrant County because that request ultimately is approved by Tarrant County, and they have to check ADA, accessibility, and things like that of the sites. That request came for our school sites, not only late, but also with customary that when they ask for our school sites, the city wants us to provide a school site that is available in May and June for the June runoffs, if there are any. And so we settled all that. I think, Ms. Benjamin, that was in January when all that was settled. And so keeping with that, those 3 sites would not be available in June because they're under construction. So those 3 sites are Gunn, Junior High, Berry, and Shackelford. And you know, we have a bond program, and Berry, for example, will be under demolition at that time. And so they were available in May, but not June, and that's what the city usually requests. So the late request came, we want to use them even if they're only available in May. And so thank you to Lisa Benjamin and Dr. Hill for continuing to be diligent on that request. And so we are open to having them use those sites. If Tarrant County completes their assessment and decide that those are sites, then we will add Shackelford, Gunn, and Berry Elementary. And we don't have that information yet, but Ms. Benjamin indicates that we can amend those sites after the board votes because the board is voting on the notice, not necessarily the sites. Is that correct, Ms. Benjamin? Okay, perfect. So I want to provide a little bit of context because that's a recent development that you aren't seeing in the locations that you may see in an amended printing of those locations. With that, we recommend approval of this item.
Mr. Wilbanks.
President Mays, I move.
Hold on. I rejected you on accident.
President Mays, I move to approve the notice of election for May 1st, 2021 trustee election.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion by Mr. Wilbanks, a second by Mr. Hogg. Any discussion? Yes. Mr. Hogg.
Dr. Cavazos, with potential other sites being added, is there any extra?
Now you have to let it. There you go. You got it.
There we go. Dr. Cavazos, with potential of other sites being added by the county and city, is there any extra cost we should be expecting? Because these election costs are split between organizations.
You're correct, Mr. Hogg, that the election costs are split by organizations, but it is our understanding, as Benjamin can verify, but it's our understanding that because this request was made at this time by the city, that the city will bear all the costs for the additional sites.
Awesome. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Hogg. Okay, seeing no other discussion at this time, please vote. Okay, all have voted. In the positive, the motion passes. Thank you. Thank you again, Ms. Benjamin. Thank you again, Dr. Hill. Thank you, Dr. Cavazos, for making sure that this late request happened. As we know, AISD is completely open to making sure that voters in our community have a place to continue to vote. Okay, next on our agenda are discussion action items. Our 2020-2021 school operations update, Dr. Cavazos.
Thank you, President Mays. And so this evening, as we have for a number of board meetings, we bring an update on our operations. And this is a brief update as we have updated the board in every board meeting. But we want to go through those COVID numbers and things like that. So at this time, Dr. Brown will lead us through this presentation.
Good evening. Thank you. Good to see everyone. President Mays, members of the board, and Dr. Cavazos, thank you for this opportunity to provide a brief school operations update for you today. So at a glance, we're going to talk about our AISD and Tarrant County COVID data, as we do every board meeting. We'll also provide an update to the STAR EOC testing to share those challenges we had a couple of days ago and just our next steps. And then we're going to close with an in-person virtual learning update as it relates to our high schools transitioning out of hybrid to in-person daily learning. So as usual, we begin with our guiding principles. And the first, of course, prioritizing the health and safety of all of our students and staff members. Make sure that we are honoring stakeholder input and voice as we make decisions, and we have throughout the year. Make sure that all of our students have access to rigorous learning, whether it's in person or at home, providing educational equity to our students, and of course, offering and asking for flexibility and grace, which has been the cornerstone of this entire year. So we are going to start with our AISD COVID data. And so we do share with you every board meeting our self-reporting cases by the month. And so this is when someone, of course, has either symptoms that could be COVID-like illness symptoms, have tested positive, or have been exposed to someone who has tested positive for COVID. And you can see we're just a little into April. We have just shy of 50 self-reports so far this month. March, we had only 256 to report. And so that leads us to our dashboard. So we are still continuing to update our dashboard every week. Our communications team in partnership with health services make sure that this information is accurate and available to our public. So as of Tuesday, a couple of days ago, we had 3 active staff cases, which resulted in 54 quarantines. And so I just put a little arrow up so you would know that that was an increase from the previous week, the previous board meeting. As far as students, we had 23 active cases on Tuesday, and that's down from the previous board meeting. And we have over 328 students who are in active quarantine right now. So along that line, I just want to share, since the last board meeting, just to provide additional context to our COVID data, we've had about 65 confirmed cases of students and staff combined. 19 of those were asymptomatic cases, and that has resulted in 400 students and staff, being quarantined in the last few weeks. Our COVID rapid testing center is still up and going, and we are, of course, still performing tests as we get those appointments request. We've done over 172 tests performed since the last board meeting. 4 of those have tested positive. There were a couple of those who had a false negative and did test positive when they went to their physician. So we're still continuing that process and make recommendations to get a PCR if needed. Now transitioning, of course, to our Tarrant County metrics for safer in-person instruction. We all know this probably by heart by now, but I will share some new information with you today. The community spread level has been substantial for several months, and it has now changed to moderate. So that is certainly something that we are celebrating movement in the right direction. If you do look at our 7-day moving positivity rate, it has stayed, okay, there we go. Our 7-day moving positivity rate is about 6%, and that's remaining about the same for the last few weeks. So that's something that I know our public health officials are just keeping an eye on. As it relates to virus spread, as of April 3rd, a little over 1,050 cases, and that virus spread is going down. That 7-day moving average for COVID-like illness is trending downward right now at about 1%. And finally, the percent of all beds occupied by COVID patients being at about 3%. And of course, that's trending down as well. So something for us to at least see movement in the right direction. So we always celebrate that. As it relates to now transitioning to our STAR and EOC testing, you all did know that on Tuesday, many of our students in 4th grade and 7th grade and our English 1 EOC students did attempt, many did, and men successfully did take the STAR or EOC exam. But as you're aware, we did have some technical challenges that were experienced statewide on Tuesday. And so the students who did take the paper test, however, were not impacted. It's only for those who took the online test. So I thought it'd be helpful to share with you the number of students who were impacted in Arlington and just kind of what our next steps are to make sure we can still capture those students who tested or who attempted to test a couple of days ago. So as it relates to the impact in Arlington, we had over 4,650 students who were impacted. That means they either attempted to take the exam, they logged in, they may have been kicked out, they just were not able to submit their exam. And so we had over 4,650. 49 of our campuses had 1 or more students who were impacted by that. However, we did have over 1,900 students who were able to successfully enter or submit their writing exam at 28 campuses. So next steps for that is we are making sure that our campuses, did I go? Okay, make sure I didn't go too fast. Our campuses now are working with our parents to make sure we can reschedule any of those students who are virtual learners who did come for testing day and weren't able to. We have until May 7th to do that makeup test. And so we are working with our testing team, our campuses, to make sure we provide that day, a new date and time for our parents to get the students back up as soon as possible. And our research and accountability team is working with ETS, which is the vendor for the test, to make sure if when we do retest, if we have those challenges again virtually or on the online test, that we have a paper backup as well to be able to provide to our students. All right, next topic is our hybrid high school. So we talked to you during the last board meeting about just kind of digging around and talking to people, getting input about transitioning out of hybrid to everyday in-person instruction at our high schools. So the first thing we did, we made sure we sought input from our staff and county health officials to make sure this was a good decision for us health-wise first. We then asked parents, we're still in the process of that right now, asking parents to make a decision for that six weeks. With what you know right now, will your student be learning from home the final 6 weeks or in person? And that gives our staff data to be able to make plans to transition safely to those students back to the high school. So what we're doing next, we're continuing to collect survey. We're going to try to get as much as we can by Friday, which is tomorrow, of those students. Our campus teams are doing a really good job of strategizing, trying to find ways to motivate and encourage our students to come back in person, face-to-face, to finish out the school year strong. And then we'll continue to monitor daily attendance and of course, outreach to any students who started showing up and they dropped off. We want to make sure we try to capture as many of those students as we possibly can. April 13th is the beginning of the last 6 weeks of school, and that will be the first day of daily in-person attendance for our high school students. All right, with that, I'm happy to take any questions you all have.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brown.
Yes.
Do I have trustees with questions? Mr. Wilbanks.
Thank you, President Mason. Thank you, Dr. Brown. I just have 2 questions.
Yes.
One related to the START testing. If you could pull up the slide on the number of students impacted. So just for clarification, Dr. Brown, the roughly 2,000 students that successfully completed, was that in addition to the students impacted, or are those students also considered part of that 4,600 that were impacted?
Yeah, they're actually mutually exclusive. So those close
Okay.
to 2,000 kids are the ones.
Thank you. I assume that, but it just wasn't clear. So, and are we confident that the students that weren't able to success, that we'll be able to accommodate them by the May 7th deadline?
Yes, we're confident about that. Plans are already underway to be able to make sure we can take care of that.
Okay. I'm glad at least almost 2,000 were successful. Wish it was higher. And my fingers are crossed given this snafu. I know the ETS was already on the chopping block as a vendor for the state, but it just it's just another reason why I think the right decision this year was to cancel the STAR for this year. And I'm sorry our students and students across the state had to go through that. And the other one was related to the COVID stats for the county
Yes, sir.
and the impact on the district. So those are all great signs. I'm glad we finally at least hit the moderate level. Looks like the only cause of concern is that 7-day moving average, which the ideal rate is below 5%. And it's just kind of been stubborn at that 6%. Or do you have any insight into what's different now in terms of those that are testing positive? Are we seeing a greater impact in younger children, for instance? Because I know most seniors are now vaccinated and we're seeing a lot of decline in that population. Where is that positivity rate coming from?
That's a great question. I'd like to pitch that to Nurse Minnerly, and she'll be able to give you more details. I think she's joining us live through Zoom. So Ms. Minnerly, I'll kick it to the expert.
Hello. As far as specific numbers, I don't have specific numbers, but if you do look at the trend of what percent is positive by age, the 0 to 15 has been steadily increasing and just in the last week or so leveled off. So it's a much larger percentage of the numbers than it previously was. So we're definitely seeing more cases in children compared to older adults than we had been.
Well, at least that does sound like a glimpse of bright news there, that it's leveling off for that age group. And do we know if that's related to this, the new British strain that is highly virulent, or did I say that right?
Yes, you did.
I don't think we know that yet here in Tarrant County. In other states that have had the B117 variant longer than we have, it is definitely related, and they're definitely seeing some changes in the spread pattern related to that variant, where the previously with the, if you will, the wild variant that we originally had, the older adults seem to be the primary spreaders, and then children really weren't. It was more the parent got it at work and brought it home to the children.
Mhm.
With the B117 variant, it seems to be the other way. The children, it's more like influenza. The children get the virus with their peers and then take it home.
Yeah. So it sounds like it's very prudent for us to, and important for us to keep up the mask and safety protocols we do have in place.
At this point, excuse me, yeah, at this point, yes, it would be.
Okay. And final question, Ms. Minnerly, I'd planned to ask you this question. So the CDC finally came out yesterday, I believe it was, as reported in the New York Times, and clearly stated that the spread is airborne spread, not surface contact spread, and that a lot of this hygiene theater, for lack of a better term, that we're going through is probably not effective. And I know the head of the Harvard Safe Buildings department with Harvard University is strongly advocating that we schools and businesses redirect the money that's being spent on these harsh chemicals and sprayers, just sprayer disinfectants, and a lot of the other expensive surface contact treatments be redirected for HEPA filters and things that help with filtration and ventilation. Is that something that we're looking at doing?
Since it just came out yesterday, we'll have to look at that with plant services. But there has definitely been a trend toward being aware that the original thought that surface transmission was a problem is not accurate, and it's primarily a respiratory virus.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Minnerly. Thank you, Dr. Brand.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wilbanks. Do I have any other trustees with questions? Yes, Dr. Reich?
Thank you, President Mays, and thank you, Dr. Brown, for the information. On that approximate 6,600 or so total students that took the STAR, how does that compare to the total possible that could have taken it, considering if it was a normal type of year? What's the delta there?
So are you asking for the total number of students who did test?
No, the total number of students that could have tested versus that did test.
Okay, Dr. Barlow, if Dr. Barlow's on the call, he may have that information. I don't have that information, Trustee Reich.
I was just curious if what the difference is, and if this number, assuming that those several thousand will get to take it successfully and complete it, if that data will be valuable as far as a representative sample for our district, because the whole point of it is to see how they're doing and how much of a gap there is. And if the sample size is too small, then it's kind of insignificant. So I was curious about that.
It's a question.
Yeah, and we'll get that information, Dr. Reich, as to how
Okay.
many potential. Just a quick, you're not asking this question, but kind of you alluded to it. just for context and without belaboring the past, but for context, this has happened before with the STAR test, this glitch, if you will,
Oh, right.
statewide. And, the first effect where that's felt is with the student. And we know that, and it's disruptive. It's not good. It kind of breaks the concentration and all the things you can imagine. But we're going to work our way up. So in Arlington, how it affected us that year was that the state arbitrarily said that if you were disrupted in this testing, your scores don't count. You could have passed the test, but the state said you experienced a disruption, you don't count.
Yep.
So much so, kind of back to our district, we appealed one of our ratings because there was evidence that the kids had actually passed, but they were eliminated from the accountability because they were disrupted. And we lost that appeal from the state. And so this has major, and there's no accountability this year, so that's important to note. But this has major impact from the student to the school, district, et cetera, because when Dr. Reich, the implications for those ratings and things like that for a school, the school building, the teachers in the building, the community, et cetera. So many ramifications. And again, there's no accountability this year, but that was a big source of our appeal, and without the state budging on that, they just eliminated the scores, and it was in the thousands in the past. And so I say that because the future of this test, at least the planning future, is that it'll all go electronic at some point. And these things really intuitively we know need to get worked out because they built a whole system that's dependent on the score, if you will. So anyway, wanted to add that context as a reminder of how it's affected us before. We've been here before.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, and in my opinion, STAR needs to be worked right out of the building completely. But that's a different story. Okay. The only other question that I had was regarding bringing our high schoolers back, getting rid of hybrid and encouraging as many in person as possible. I'm not familiar, Dallas has a lot of press lately about their initiative to bring all the seniors back live. And without doing any research, just hearing it in the media, it seems that they're requiring it. And I don't know if that's valid, if that's accurate or not. I was wondering if you could share any nuances or differences or similarities of what we're doing to try to bring those kids back. And is there anything that we're not utilizing that we could to try to get them back, whether that's encouragement or requirement?
Yeah, well, I'm not as familiar with Dallas's plan, but I can just talk to you about the high schools that we have, and their teams have gotten together and they have brainstormed and have lots of different ways and ideas of strategies, whether it's freshmen or seniors, having specific days that you are, having activities and events to be able to encourage them to come back to engage in those activities. Lots of outreach, knocking on doors, phone calls to parents. I mean, they're really trying, whatever they can do to try to get these folks back. I was watching Martin High School had a YouTube video that they produced, and it was "I Want You Back" to Michael Jackson's old song. And so that was just a fun way for the staff to come on video and say, hey, we want you to come back. So just in general, very campus specific, but they are looking at ways to incentivize and motivate and encourage them to at least finish the 6 weeks strong at the high schools.
Yeah. And I'm sure with the flexibility that we have in the system, maybe that first week will start off a little slow, but by the second week and definitely the third week, I think we're going to see a ton back. That word's going to spread pretty quick. They're going to want to be back. The soft skills and the socialization, that's what we're all missing. So,
Sure.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Trustee Reich.
Thank you, Dr. Reich. I do not see any additional lights on for questions from trustees. So thank you, Dr. Brown. I have a couple of questions. One, I just wanted to confirm that you said that the date that will be rescheduled to take the test, that y'all are working to confirm that the state can send paper tests just in case something happens on that same day, we
That is,
don't have to try to schedule another day for so forth.
that's correct.
Very good. Appreciate that effort.
Yes.
Then my other questions may either be for you or Ms. Minnerly, but I am assuming that our staff has had the communication that if they get a negative, that it could be false, and for them to take that option to see their own doctor if they choose.
Are you referring to the rapid test?
Yes, to the rapid
Yes.
test.
That's correct, but I'd like Nurse Minnerly, if you could just go ahead and add on to anything that I may have missed.
Yes, ma'am. They're given a sheet with instructions, and they're definitely encouraged to either see their healthcare provider or seek a PCR test, which is the more accurate test.
Thank you. And then how often can our employees test? If they're testing negative, can they continue to test every week, every 2 weeks, every month if they choose for rapid testing?
They can test anytime they or someone in their household is symptomatic.
Okay. Okay. And will we continue to do the rapid testing through the summer?
We're discussing that right now, how that would look and how we would do it to continue it at least during this time that we have students in the buildings.
Okay. Thank you very much. Those are my questions. Once again, thank you, Dr. Brown. Mr. Hogg may have a question. Mr. Hogg.
Yeah, thank you, President Mason. Sorry, I had one question actually two pop up. When you get that information for Dr. Reich, did we have a higher than normal amount of opt-outs this year for STAR?
So make sure I answer the question the way, because it's a challenging question. There is no opt-out and in normal years. And so.
But parents and students can refuse to test.
Okay, so that's where it gets challenging. So they really can't, they can refuse to go to school that day,
Right.
obviously. But if you show up to school, and this is a long story and I'll try not to make it too long, because we've got this clearance, from TEA. If you show up to school and it's a testing day, you can take the test.
Right.
In the past, okay, pre-COVID. And if there's no opt-out, there's not a form you can fill out or anything, because we've asked, and parents have asked us, I want to opt out. We say there's no opt-out. Well, I'm not going to send them to school that day. Then that becomes a choice, right? Now, into this situation, very similar. Commissioner, during this phase of announcement of testing, indicated that virtual students would not be required to take the test.
Right.
And so we asked them, kind of on the other end of that, are you coming to take the test?
Mhm.
So it still wasn't, and it's still not classified as an opt-out, just to be clear, because there's a lot of.
And let me correct it. Then I guess when we run those numbers for Dr. Reich, I guess it's total numbers from last year to total numbers this year.
Well, total eligible this year, absolutely.
Total
Fourth,
eligible and also total that if we'll take it,
That's correct.
that show up and actually
That's
take
correct.
the test, I think is a critical number for us to evaluate and review
That's
to
correct.
see what those numbers are. I don't know, Dr. Barlow will run all those numbers and start running them, but before we get results back and things like that, I would like to see
Absolutely.
the numbers that actually took the test.
That's correct.
And we've taken them after these reschedules. Appreciate that. Let me ask the question that popped up. As we talk about the reschedules of those tests, we'd previously approved an asynchronous day for students. Will that be asynchronous again on reschedule, or will we allow all students to come to campus?
That's a great question too. We've been talking about that. And so one of the things that we talked to principals about was doing their very best to try to find ways to get all the students back into the school where we don't have to use any more async days. That's kind of our backup plan. If we need it, that we would use that. So with this situation, there's a number of students, we don't have a ton that are in any specific school at this point that have to retest. So it's possible we may not have to. It just really depends on when we repoll those parents to ask them, are you going to bring your child back? And if they say yes, then we'll be able to determine if we have the space and opportunity to be able to bring everyone back without using an async.
And if staff determines there should be asynchronous days, that would have to come back before the board, correct, to approve that?
It does not, Mr. Hogg. I think the way that we left it was that the waiver was approved and we were to manage it and eventually report how many async days a school is requesting and has used. That's how it was.
Was it for specific days or was it
For
for?
testing, for testing.
But days for those testing?
That's correct. And also, but specifically, because this is, I know it sounds like a lot of numbers and they are, but this is only the writing test. There's other tests coming
Right.
later. And so it is our goal, and this is what Tracy's alluding to avoid async days during testing. That is our goal. Many campuses were able to meet that goal without a problem. Some couldn't because the numbers just didn't allow it. That's our continued goal moving forward. So we are trying to minimize or not use, however we want to say it, async days for testing. So many, I think more than the majority of elementaries did not need an async day, for example. High schools gets more complicated and all that, but we're still working on the goal of we don't want async days for testing. For this particular situation, this is where this gets very disruptive because we had an async day for writing, those who needed it, and justified it through the area and all that. And then we have this problem, and now we have to, it was all set for one async day, minimize the number of days, and now it's back to, well, we have to reschedule and all that. But even with the rescheduling, our goal, just to be clear, is not to have an async day for testing. And that's our, and I commend the areas and Dr. Brown, because they've been pressing pretty strongly on that. And many of our schools were able to not need an async day, and hopefully fewer will need it the next time.
And I appreciate that. I especially appreciate staff working hard to get students back in. I heard from numerous parents that they do face a major inconvenience when it goes back to an asynchronous day. It is a problem. It is a challenge for them to find childcare, to find someone to watch over their children. I've been very vocal up here about how do we get more students back in the classroom every single day. So I asked specifically if we voted on it. I can tell you I would not support it if we did vote on it, another asynchronous day from that standpoint. So I encourage staff to consider that. And I would, once this is getting near completion, or we know, I would like to see how many asynchronous days we did have to award in different campuses to get there, just so we can track. Because it is, you hear some really tough stories from some parents that are having to find that childcare. And I agree with you. A couple of them, I told them specifically to reach out to their principals, and they did. And the principals were very accommodating in finding ways, because some parents are totally okay with it. They like some asynchronous days, and then there's some others that have a really hard challenge with it. So I appreciate our principals doing that. It's one of those, it was necessary that we voted on it and approved it, but we also have to take into account it does cause some inconvenience. So I always talk about options and flexibility. Absolutely. This is one of those times. So I would encourage and commend our staff for saying, minimize your asynchronous days.
And Mr. Hogg, to your point, it's clear that this is not default. This is not just you default because you can have an async day. This is, you've got to justify why you need an async day. And then last point, just for context, there's certain grade levels at elementary that you cannot apply the async to, just to round that discussion off. It was mostly for 5th and 6th graders, I think, Tracy, where we needed it.
Or pre-K, we can't have.
You cannot,
async for
right,
pre-K.
but if you needed async, it was for the older kids.
Yes.
Not for the younger kids, it's not allowed.
Right. Okay.
Keep them there every single day.
I appreciate it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Mr. Hogg. And I see you, Mr. Wilbanks, but hold on one moment. I also see Dr. Barlow up on the screen. I don't know if Dr. Barlow, if you have anything to add to anything that's been discussed or any questions we have before we have our final question and wrap up.
Well, certainly it sounds like y'all have covered most of the topics there. I didn't hear all of the number piece, but certainly we can run numbers. And maybe just to kind of recap there, again, it was 3 grade levels, the 4th grade, 7th grade, and really the English 1 test. So I was trying to do some quick calculations on what that might have looked like as far as numbers. So you're probably talking about 10 to 12,000 students who could have tested if everybody was at campus. I want to say maybe we had half of the students that were actually testing, and then probably over 1,000 students that ran into some sort of glitch. But I can get clarification on that. We can run those numbers, make sure that you have the correct numbers there. Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Dr. Barlow. Mr. Wilbanks.
Thank you, President Mays. And I just wanted to piggyback on my colleague, Mr. Hogg, unintended. That no, in all seriousness, back to the asynchronous issue. I also talked to a number, sorry. I also talked to a number of parents that were struggling with the number of asynchronous days, that were out of PTO time, were facing having to stay at home to take care of young ones on an asynchronous day and actually lose income for the week because of that. And so I want to commend you. I know a lot of principals were caring and showed empathy and kind of worked with those parents. But yes, I would echo the calls to, do everything possible so that we avoid any more disruption in terms of asynchronous days, and continue to show empathy for those parents that those are really negatively impacting if we have to do so forward coming up. But kudos to the principals and the staff and everyone who is trying to be accommodating. But I also share Mr. Hugg's concern, and we really need to be done with the asynchronous days.
Thank you, Mr. Wilbanks. Okay, I see no other names listed for questions. Once again, thank you, Dr. Brown. Thank you, Ms. Minnerly, and thank you, Dr. Barlow. Okay, next on our agenda, we have discussion action item, consider motions necessary. I do not think we have any. Dr. Cavazos, would you agree?
President Mays, we do not have any.
Okay, then we will move on to our items to be withdrawn from our consent agenda. Are there any items to be withdrawn from the consent agenda? Okay, I see no names. We will move on. Tonight, we will be considering the items that are listed on the agenda under consent items. Mrs. Moss, are you there?
Thank you. Thank you, President Mays, trustees, Dr. Cavazos. We have 6 items for your consideration tonight that are $50,000 or more, and we have 8 bids that have been vetted by our purchasing department also for your considerations. For donations tonight, our current report for you is $10,762. Total year to date, $769,952. Our prior year total as of April 2nd, $589,307. And our total donations for the 1920 year were $685,728. Administration recommends approval for all the consent items.
Thank you very much, Ms. Moss. Is there a motion to accept our consent agenda? Ms. Walton?
Thank you, President Mays. Yes, I move that we approve the consent agenda.
Dr. Reich?
Oh, second.
So we've got a motion by Ms. Walton, a second by Dr. Reich. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, please vote. Thank you. All present vote in the affirmative. Motion passes. Okay, next on our agenda are discussion items, our legislative update. Dr. Cavazos.
Thank you, President Mays. And as everyone is well aware, we have a legislative session that is in progress. And as always, we have a lot of activity going on. And we have our wonderful consultant, David Anderson, who provides great guidance and support during the legislative session and even when it's not in session. And I just want to, before he begins what I anticipate will be an outstanding presentation. Before he begins, I do want to thank you, David, for being such a great partner with the district, representing our interest and listening and also giving us advice. And it's very valuable, very valuable. And so it makes a difference. So at this time, I'll turn this legislative update to David Anderson to lead us through that.
Thank you. Am I coming in loud and clear?
You are.
Okay. I think that someone is going to walk you through the PowerPoint. We should be on the first slide that says the 87th session. I did want to frame this for you for just a moment. We're in the 13th week. We have 54 days to go. When we get down to the 7th and the 6th and the 5th week, we start paying much more attention to calendar deadlines, the House calendars in particular. When we look at this, we think probably about May 10th is going to be when things really get serious for bills that haven't been heard from them or voted out of committee by then. If we back that up a little bit, we pretty much have 2 more weeks of hearings for bills to have any sort of shot to get to the finish line. So if we would, let's go to the second slide, and let me tell you a little bit about this unusual legislative session. I think we all recognize the circumstances that have affected this. First, the COVID pandemic. You had discussion about this tonight, as I know you have at every board meeting for the last 13 months. But the pandemic has affected the legislature pretty significantly. First, the economic impact and what that meant for our budget. You recall when we talked in committee in the fall, our big concern was the shortfall that the state was facing. But for a lot of reasons, the economic impact and how that's affected the budget going forward, that situation has improved tremendously over the last 4 to 5 months. But the economic impact of the pandemic certainly has taken time this session, as has some attention to the health policy implications. How do we take steps as a state to ensure that we are better prepared if we ever face something like this again? The third thing I would say is that, and this is something much more for me than anyone else, and that is just how this has affected access to the building and to hearing rooms and to offices. Because of the caution that the leadership in the House and the Senate have very appropriately taken, it's just not as easy to get in the building. And it was particularly troublesome early in the session when there really wasn't a lot going on. Things slowed down pretty tremendously. COVID pandemic, number one. Second, the winter blizzard. Had we had just the winter blizzard in any other session, it would have had a heck of an impact. We lost an entire week of the 20 weeks because we couldn't get into the building. But it also had an impact on all of the things that happened for several weeks after that because of the reactionary nature of our elected officials. This was a terrible circumstance. What can we do right now to address this? And that's affected the session also. And the third thing is the staggering amount of federal funds to support Texas, to support education, that have come into Texas and will continue to come. Any one of those 3 circumstances would have made this a very unusual session. We happen to have all 3 going on during this 20-week 87th session. So if you would, let's go to the next slide, because we do have 13 weeks in the book and 7 to go. I do want to take a quick look at some of the issues beyond public education. And when you look at this, I think that you see that we have had a number of circumstances that will characterize this session for a long time to come. I mentioned the impact of the freeze and the state energy policies and practices. Broadband is a big issue this time. An offshoot of both the pandemic and the circumstances with the freeze. And then the other issue that I know some of you are concerned about, and that is the restrictions on local government and the advocacy efforts that local governments may have. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. Let's go to the next slide, the one that touches on the issue that dominates every legislative session, appropriations. House Bill 1 and Senate Bill 1 are the appropriations bills this session. House Bill 1 is the bill that will move forward. This is a session in which the House bill will be the bill. We expect to have House Bill 1 on the floor of the House 2 weeks from today, April 22nd. That could slip a little, but we anticipate that they will be debating the appropriations bill then. Important for your legislative agenda and the interests of Dr. Cavazos and Dr. Wirtz and Ms. Moss and the entire leadership team at Arlington. House Bill 3 is fully funded in the appropriations bill. And that was something that the commitment to that was very clear early in the session. The Senate has followed through as it passed Senate Bill 1. And it's clear the House is going to stay committed to that as it takes action on House Bill 1. I do want to point out there's a rider in House Bill 1. We call it the Morrison rider. It was inserted by State Representative Jeannie Morrison of Victoria. Several other members had similar riders, but hers is the one that stayed in. And that is a rider that provides direction in the appropriations bill that the federal funding that has yet to come, basically the third tranche of the federal support, will go to the schools, that it will not be kept at the state agency, that it will go to schools. Now, that's a symbolic rider. Whether it stays in the bill or not is hard to say. Some people believe there's some issues with whether that would be subject to a point of order. But the key point is there's a lot of support for this. And in many ways, the Morrison rider may be a placeholder for one of the bills that provides much more clear direction about getting those dollars into the hands of school districts. Some of you may be aware that earlier this week on Tuesday, the CEO of H-E-B Grocery Stores, Charles Butt, sent a letter to all of the legislators encouraging them to take all steps necessary to ensure that those dollars get to the schools where decisions closer to the learner may be made. It was very important when we see our state's largest employer, that CEO, one of the most respected citizens in Texas, make a statement like that. It certainly says that it is important to business in the state of Texas that the school districts have authority to use those funds to help with local circumstances. I also want to mention with appropriations, House Bill 2, the supplemental appropriations bill, was heard in House Appropriations this morning. That will take care of any lingering issues for this 2021 fiscal year, the second year of the biennium. There is one other bill that relates to appropriations that I want you to know about, and that's House Bill 2021. Connects real well with our fiscal year 2021. This directs the use of federal relief funds. And it's not a bill that we particularly would want to embrace right now. But what it does is point out some of the tension that exists in the legislature about who actually gets to make the call about those dollars. Because when the legislature is not in session, it defaults to the governor. This bill proposes a committee that would include House members, senators, the governor, as well as people from the Legislative Budget Board or some role for the Legislative Budget Board. That's part of the tension. The third part of that tension, though, is there are a lot of members, including some in the Arlington delegation, that very appropriately say, you know, we've never had an amount of money like this. It's important for the entire legislature to be involved with providing direction for these funds. So that's an issue we're going to be watching and hoping to help shape in a very direct way so that those dollars do come to Arlington ISD, to Irving ISD, to Grand Prairie ISD, and to the other districts around the state. So let's move on to our next slide. Issues that shape the 87th session. I mentioned a little bit earlier the energy, the broadband, the advocacy. I think important to your role, trustees, President Mays and others, we see bills that right now would put some pretty severe restrictions on what you're able to do with regard to engaging advocates such as Hillco Partners to work on your behalf, what you'd be able to do with membership in organizations such as TASB. Right now, House Bill 749 and House Bill 1704, the House bills are pending in state affairs. They were heard on March 25th. Nothing has happened since then. On the Senate side, Senate Bill 234 from Bob Hall from Mesquite area, the same as Senate Bill 49. That was sent to state affairs. There's been no hearing for that bill. Those are three of the more onerous bills with regard to stifling your ability to have advocates working for you in the Capitol. Senate Bill 10 is Senator Paul Bettencourt's bill. As of right now, it includes cities and counties only. School districts, community college districts, hospital districts have been removed from that bill. There was a hearing for that bill on Tuesday, 2 days ago, in the Senate Local Government Committee, chaired by Senator Bettencourt, the author of the bill. We also have Senate Bill 1879, which is pending in Senate Local Government, and that's the reporting bill. That would tighten reporting requirements if a local government pays dues or engages someone who is required to register as a lobbyist under Texas Ethics Code's provisions. So This is an issue that will get a lot more attention over the next 3 to 4 weeks. Next slide. In education, we have a lot of things that we are tracking. We've got over 850 bills in our education track. Of course, not all of those are going to move. We see a lot of them in committees other than education again this session. One that is of specific interest because of the legislative agenda is the Huberty-Taylor Act adjustments, House Bill 1525 in the House, Senate Bill 1536 in the Senate. These are the bills that go back and correct some of the things that slipped through the cracks when House Bill 3 passed last session. It also clarifies some of the implementation problems that have come up at TEA. That bill was voted out of the House committee on the 30th of March. The Senate bill had the hearing today. The House bill will be the one that moves. So if you're watching a bill, it's House Bill 1525. In draft form, the House version got to be as long as 50 to 60 pages. But problems with the review of that bill and the perhaps overly complicated parts of it led to Chairman Huberty filing a 19-page bill, the same as the Senate bill. It has grown since then. It will probably be about 30 pages, and there are still issues that are being worked on there. That bill we expect to get to the House floor in another week or so, where you'll see a lot of amendments on it. Keep in mind, Chairman Huberty is a master of floor control of the bill, and I have no doubt that he will do his usual amazing job keeping that bill focused on what truly is important. We do have a second issue that I want to mention, and that's charter policy. This session, I've seen greater tension between school district leadership and charter leadership than I've ever seen before. And I think that's an offshoot of the circumstances in which the charter schools, the greater flexibility that they have with a lot of things, including where they locate and how they expand, has really reached ahead. What I think could happen there, trustees, is that the interest that the House side has in putting some constraints on some of these policies will be the irresistible force that meets the immovable object of the Senate that would like to see greater flexibility. I don't know how this will turn out. We're going to stay very engaged on it, but we could see that at the end of the session, charter policy in Texas is fairly status quo. Third big issue, virtual education. Hand in hand with broadband, the virtual bills will stand alone, but the effectiveness of those virtual bills will be very much dependent on what we do with broadband legislation. House Bill 5, Trent Ashby's omnibus broadband bill, passed the House this afternoon overwhelmingly. And that's the bill to keep an eye on, because that bill does almost everything you would want it to do with regard to state broadband policy, specifically broadband policy with regard to public ed. On virtual, Keith Bell has a bill that we believe is the best bill out of the dozen or so virtual bills. It addresses a lot of the key issues that are important to you and to Dr. Cavazos and his team. Local determination about broadband programming, about virtual education programming, with no financial penalties for having that option for students. And specific to Mr. Hogg's comment earlier, the bill as envisioned would leave the option in the hands of the school districts. You would be able to have as wide or as narrow a program as you want. There are a number of other provisions in there. It would really fundamentally eliminate the need to go to the Office of the Commissioner of Education for waivers with regard to virtual ed. And I think very representative of your perspective on so many governance issues. It gets the authority back in the hands of trustees to set the policy for the superintendent and his team to carry out. Now, there's another bill, and that's a Ken King bill, that would establish an interim commission to look at virtual education. And I think this is an excellent bill also. The two bills are not mutually exclusive. They actually complement one another very well. And I'm hopeful that those are the two bills that we see passed. There are other bills. I think there are aspects to every one of the other bills that would be troublesome with regard to the sort of governance that you have established as your goal in your legislative agendas over the last several sessions. I think that if we end up with the status quo on virtual, that's not good because there's too much authority in the hands of the office of the commissioner if nothing happens. And we could see the waiver authority used to create some circumstances that would not necessarily be in the best interests of the independent school districts. We do have several bills that obligate the federal funds. I'm not going to get into all of those because we would be here until well after midnight looking at some of the arcane features of those bills. We do have several other specific bills that if you're interested, we can come back to. But let's move on right now to the next slide. And I'm looking at this to make sure I'm keeping up with you. And this is the slide that says common thread, governance and responsibilities. There are a lot of bills this session that speak to governance and responsibilities, and a number of them shift responsibility and authority for decision-making, particularly in the area of instruction, away from independent school districts and place it in the Office of the Commissioner of Education at the State Education Agency. And again, consistent with your interests in your legislative agenda and how I feel about this personally, those bills concern me very much because we're in a state in which the State Education Agency is exactly that, a state agency. It's not the State Department of Education. It's a regulatory agency that is fundamentally responsible for the regulation of what we do in our public schools. Technical assistance has been the charge of the 20 regional service centers for now over 50 years. And the local authority, the idea that the state tells you what students should know and be able to do, and you have the authority and the responsibility for establishing local policies and practices to deliver instruction, reaffirmed for us in 1995 in Senate Bill 1. We see that eroded a little bit more and a little bit more each session. There are a number of bills that would create some significant erosion in that. It concerns me that in this session that follows such a successful one for education in 2019, we see so many bills that are undermining the fundamental foundations of our governance of public education in Texas. If you'll go with me to the next slide, I do want to just give us a quick scorecard at this point. This is not going to be an A through F, Dr. Barlow, so don't worry about standing by to interpret that. I will tell you, though, that the bumper sticker version of your legislative priorities, A through G, appropriate funding. I think this could be an A+ session for us when we get done because of the commitment to fund House Bill 3 programs, to continue to support till the end of this semester the hold harmless, and to make sure that there is additional money for enrollment growth and to continue to buy down property taxes as committed by the legislature in 2019. House Bill 3 support, continued tax relief, as an offshoot of that. It's a specific item in your agenda. Again, I think we're on the right path there. Implementation of House Bill 3, specific item in your agenda. I've commented on that several times. Now, incomplete, increasing access to affordable health insurance. We have a number of bills that speak to this responsibility of TRS, including the TRS sunset bill. And those bills, very few of those have come out of committee. There's a lot of work left to be done there. And I'll be working with Dr. Cavazos to make sure that he and Mr. Hill have all the information you may want on those over the next 2 weeks. The accountability recalculation and STAR reliance reduction. I've got to check by that because we've certainly seen this spring that the STAR reliance reduction is there because of all of the circumstances that happened primarily because of the COVID. But that is a work in progress also. I think we've got a lot to do there. We have members who absolutely want to do something about this on the House side, including almost your entire delegation. Our issue with this is on the Senate side, where the fealty to the STAR test and the current accountability system continues to be very strong. Improved funding for mental health needs, incomplete. We have several bills that we watch, and we really do need to see what happens with Article 2, the health article with the appropriations bill. And then, of course, the governance, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, I think that's incomplete and one that I'm very concerned about. So last slide. 86 days behind us, 54 days ahead. We can't even begin to give you an in-depth perspective on everything in our short time with you tonight, but I hope that this gives you an overview, and I'm happy to try to answer any questions or respond to any concerns that you may have. So President Mays, back to you for any comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Anderson, and we appreciate you taking the time out to give this presentation. And I hope that it becomes very clear that there is no way within a short period of time that you could go over everything, which is why we appreciate always being available and continuing constant communication with each of us, our governance chair, Dr. Cavazos, so that we can make sure that we have the right information we need to help advocate to any of our legislators for what's going on. Appreciate that very much.
Thank you.
Do I have any questions? Ms. Walton? Yeah, touch yours.
Oh, there it went.
There you go.
Thank you, President Mays. Good to see you, Dr. Anderson. I know you've had a long day. On one of the slides, the public ed selected issues slide.
Yes.
Talking about cleanup legislation and charters and several things. And the last item on that was fund balance.
Oh, I'm sorry, and I skipped right over that. Ms. Walton, thank you for bringing that up.
Intentional or?
No, believe me, it's not. That I've got the notes here on my desk, and I just absolutely missed that one. So pardon me. The fund balance bill that Chairman Huberty has filed was heard on Tuesday night, and it was, for anyone who was listening, I think you'll agree that if I told you it was a lively discussion, I would be understating the circumstances. This is a tremendous concern because the fund balance issue, fund balances are complex. And in a state as big and diverse as Texas, with Dawson Common School District with 22 kids, to Houston ISD with over 200,000, with a number of districts that have a September 1 fiscal year, others that have the July 1, the chapter or the property wealthy districts, the property poor districts, and the flow of state dollars. It is impossible to paint this fund balance issue with a broad brush. And I appreciate what Chairman Huberty is saying about fund balances, but in many ways, he's overly simplified this issue. And there was reaction from both Democrats and Republicans on the Education Committee the other evening that certainly lead me to believe that the bill in its present form will have trouble getting out of committee. And I'll certainly keep Dr. Cavazos and Dr. Hill very well informed on this. It's an issue that is important in every school district across the state of Texas.
Okay. Ms. Walton, does that complete your questions?
Oh,
Or
yes.
did you have some more? Okay, just want to make sure I don't go on to Mr. Wilbanks before you're done. Mr. Wilbanks. Can you turn it on because I can't? There you go.
All right, here we are. So thank you, Mr. Anderson. As always, very informative. And I just have a few questions on kind of broad topics, and I'll try not to dive into the weeds on specific bills. But I know there are, as you mentioned, there are a number of bills that kind of consolidate power in the commissioner's hands.
Yes.
I guess SB 28 would be one of those.
Yes.
And then, so the other two topics outside of that would be vouchers. And I understand the writer that was in the bill in the House version is essentially dead. Is that correct?
I believe that the voucher issue, certainly a broad voucher issue is dead for this session. What we've got to continue to watch for would be any sort of targeted attempts to create vouchers for certain populations or any sort of limited application based on the type of school districts. But at this point, I feel like the voucher legislation will not get through the House of Representatives in any way, shape, or form.
Okay, great. That's great news. It appeared that would be the case. I know at least on the House side, I was hoping that it's the same story on the Senate side. The other topic is outcomes-based funding. And I know,
Yes.
I believe HB 4545.
4545, correct.
Had a little line in, well, was related to outcomes-based funding, and I think with the bonus allotment. So.
House Bill 45, David, or Mr. Wilbanks, excuse me, is a very troublesome bill on multiple levels, including the outcomes-based funding, the commissioner authority to purchase curriculum programs and contract on behalf of school districts to purchase any item for instructional purposes. It creates accelerated learning circumstances in which parents may choose teachers of record for their students. I could go on and on. It's a bill that we have looked at very carefully. I will tell you that it has several repealers that trouble me very much. And the repealers are found in the last part of the bill, and it just references sections that are repealed. But among those repealers, Dr. Cavazos, the requirement that the commissioner certify funds are available for the intervention programs that the commissioner has had to do for a couple decades. The requirement that the commissioner provide the information about the cost of the assessment on a per pupil basis is repealed. There are some accelerated instruction sections that are repealed and replaced. And the other one that I think is particularly troublesome is it removes the requirement that the assessment program, state assessment program, is paid for out of funds appropriated for that purpose. It basically would allow the commissioner to use other funds and not identify where those funds come from, based on the interpretation that one of the attorneys we work with, one of the school law people we work with, has had. So it's a bill that does a lot of things, including removes a lot of the transparency from the state education agency with regard to the operations of the state assessment program. And it is a chairman's bill in the chairman's committee, which I think all of us recognize that a chairman that has a bill in his committee has a lot of influence with the bill. Chairman Dutton and his staff have been absolutely open to conversations about his legislation, and we appreciate his willingness to engage on this. But House Bill 4545 is a very troublesome bill, in my opinion.
It seems pretty onerous, and you're a pretty sagacious guy. So I'd ask you, given that it is Dutton's bill, what's the chances of it surviving in any form, given the clock?
Well, I will tell you that our goal on behalf of you, the Hillco goal on behalf of you, is to make sure that all 12 of the other members of the House Public Education Committee understand all of the things that this bill does and how this fundamentally alters governance, how it fundamentally alters operations, how it fundamentally alters the way the state is expected to have the state assessment program with some transparency. It's been a long time since I was an assistant principal on an elementary school campus, but the last one I did that with, we had 1,200 students in Arlington ISD, where we had a high degree of mobility. If the provisions that are in this bill about parents of students who are in accelerated programs being able to select their teacher of record were in place then, we would have had an unmitigated disaster on our hands trying to meet those requirements under those circumstances. And it's no different in the great majority of other school districts in the state.
Yeah, no, thank you on that. And it's my understanding that there's even a provision for the stimulus funding to be used for
There-
that base.
You're correct. You've done your homework on this. This is one of several bills. When I mentioned it earlier that we have bills that provide direction for use of the stimulus funds. This is one of them.
Well, since we're talking about one of Mr. Dutton's bill, let's bounce over to HB 4465, which
Yes.
Is that the one that creates the commission with the lieutenant governor? I think that's one you mentioned in your, or no, that's.
This bill creates the grant programs regarding disasters that impact students. And there's some other provisions in here that we particularly were concerned with. The governance aspect in particular, because there are several places where it says that, quote, a decision by the commissioner under this section is final and may not be appealed. There are a couple of places where it references that, and we see this in another bill that on behalf of Texas School Alliance, my colleague Dee Carney is working with Chairman Dutton. Again, this is where he's been very open to conversation, but another one of his bills, it's aimed at the governance circumstance in Houston, but it has statewide application. It would, if that bill passes, it will affect Arlington and every other district in the state. Too many places do we see that phrase that a decision by the commissioner under this section is final and may not be appealed. It's in this bill that we see the opportunity for clawback of funds after there has been an adjustment in the case of some sort of disaster. And specifically in that bill, the commissioner authority to resolve maintenance issues is included. And the commissioner may adjust school funding entitlement under this chapter to ensure compliance with federal maintenance requirement, maintenance of effort. It's a slippery slope that we're going down with these bills. And they're complex. They're 12, 14, 15, 22 page bills. And we've had to go through them with a fine tooth comb to make sure that we're catching all of the implications. I read 45 3 times. It wasn't until the third time that I thought, okay, I know some of these repealers affect accelerated instruction. Let's dig into all of them. And that's where we see the ones about about funding of the state assessment program and revealing the cost per pupil.
Yeah. Well, let's, my final comment, well, I've got one more after this, but you mentioned HB 2020 Bonin's bill that creates the board committee.
2021.
Yeah, 2021. On that committee, I think you skipped over the fact that the lieutenant governor would be on that committee, the governor, kind of people, I think my colleagues would agree, are not the kind of people we would want directing our COVID relief funds. So that one seems pretty scary for me.
I will tell you that, Mr. Wilbanks, that my sense, and certainly I haven't done any sort of visit into every office on it, but the offices I have visited, including several members of the Arlington ISD delegation, they don't like it. They feel that this is such a significant amount of money dealing with such a significant circumstance, learning loss that has taken place over what will really be 15 months and could take 2 or 3 years to really address in a meaningful way. They think the entire legislature should have some say about the guardrails that are in place for those dollars. I think they're correct. This is the sort of thing that the body as a whole will make a better decision with, in my opinion, than a smaller group of people who really are representative of leadership right now.
Yeah, on that topic, you mentioned the Morrison rider in HB1, and you mentioned it was largely symbolic. And you mentioned, bills like 2021, that there are several other that attempt to direct our COVID relief money. In your mind, there's no hope for us to get any money. I mean, we need to start remediating our COVID learning loss immediately. We've got summer school programs that we're trying to ramp up and gear up for. But me reading, you know, I'm not, you're skilled at this. I'm not. Reading the tea leaves though, it sounds like we're not going to see anything until after the legislative session is over, which is going to be June, which is really too late. We don't need all of the money. This is going to, like you said, a multi-year effort, huge, heavy lift. But it's outrageous to me that Texas is one of only 10 states now that has not distributed any of the COVID relief money. And we still have the second round that the legislature hadn't decided what to do with, that was given out in December. And to me, it's just outrageous that we're having to wait through this process and all of these onerous provisions are being put forth in these bills for money that the federal government has already dictated exactly how we should use it. And we need to be using it for those reasons. And I just don't, you know, I'm keeping my fingers crossed that it will not be highly prescriptive and not be tightly controlled by either the commissioner or the legislature, but I'm starting to lose hope. Maybe you can give me some.
Well, don't lose hope, because I remain quite optimistic that the third round of funding, this potentially $18 to $19 billion for education, that third round of funding, and a significant part of that obviously will be for K-12, will go to to K-12 school districts, state charter schools, and universities, as the federal government, as the Congress has said, this is the way we want this to go. I think we'll get there. I'm not optimistic that we will see funds start to flow until after the kids have ended their regular 2021 school year. I don't think that will happen. And I don't mean to be discouraging about that. I just think the reality of things is this. The other thing I would like to say, and this, I mean this as a compliment to members across the state of Texas, including several, really all of your delegation right now. Rank and file members on the House side and a number of people on the Senate side are very committed to making sure that these funds get to the schools. And I think the great majority of them want to see those funds, the use of those funds, determined at the local level. And I think the commitment is that these are funds that are there to help with operations to support learning loss, and that you'll have these funds for 3 years. I do think the Speaker, Speaker Phelan, Greg Bonin, Dr. Bonin, who chairs the Appropriations Committee, both of those people deserve, as does Senator Nelson on the Senate side, they deserve a lot of appreciation for what they've done to hang in there and make sure that House Bill 3 is fully funded. And I think that the great majority of those people are working very steadfastly and quietly to help get these federal dollars in our hands. We just know that Texas interacts with the federal government differently. And we did during the 4 years of the Trump administration. We certainly did in the 8 years of the Obama administration. Our interaction with the federal government is just different than a lot of states. And that's I say that without value, just as an observation of what happens.
Yeah, well, my final comment to you, Mr. Anderson, is it's just a coincidence that I wore this mask tonight. It's not because of you or anything.
Well, I can't see you. All I have is the AISD logo on the board podium. So I'll say to Dr. Cavazos or someone, I hope that they will take a picture of the mask and send it to me. And I'm with you. Hook 'em horns.
My fellow Aggie.
Thank you, Mr. Wellbanks. I thought you were doing an amazing job until the final. Dr. Reich, once again, it's not working on my end, so
Oh,
there
there
you
it
go.
goes. Yeah, our technology is a little rusty tonight. First time being used in 13 months, so understand. Thank you so much, Mr. Anderson, for everything. Just a couple of quick things. With the 4545, just on the point of the ability of parents potentially choosing their teacher of record.
In accelerated instruction programs.
And in accelerated instruction programs, could that be viewed potentially as discriminatory?
Well, you know that I'm not an attorney, so I'm going to defer to Dr. Cavazos to offer any sort of insights as to what your general counsel might say, but it concerns me on a lot of levels.
Yeah, I just I know that's just one little piece, sliver really of this entire bill. I was just thinking, as you said, to educate the rest of the members of the committee. There might be some seeds to plant there if that is indeed valid. So just a point there. It's a very concerning bill. And then regarding star reliance reduction, and I know, as you stated, that the Senate has a very different view than the House. So if anything were to come up, chances are it's not going to go anywhere. With that said, are there any bills on either side that really speak to that at this point, or is it?
Yes. Well, there are multiple bills, particularly on the House side, but on the Senate side also, that speak to STAR, large-scale state assessment, accountability, but those bills are really they're not moving.
Yeah.
And my sense is that they won't. What I do think is pretty fascinating is the number of House members, well over half, have had some sort of commitment, either a public statement, comments they've made in a speech, or a bill they filed that indicates that they have great concerns about the heavy reliance on this large-scale state assessment. Now, we know from last session that there are some changes coming. Commissioner Morath conceptually believes that if we break up this assessment into chunks, you'll get better data. But even breaking it up into chunks and administering it over a period of time, it still is a large-scale state assessment program that was not designed to provide diagnostic information.
Right.
It just wasn't.
Yeah. And with that said, there's at this point, there's nothing that we can advocate for with our legislators to have them come up with steering that direction, whatever that may be, versus the TEA coming up with it on their own, specifically coming out of the pandemic, where everybody's question is, what is this thing going to look like next year?
Right.
As far as accountability, et cetera. And I surely think that every district in the state is on the same position, that it should not be dictated and created by just the TEA, that some legislative input would be helpful to guide him, but I don't know if that's going to happen.
Commissioner Morath has responded, I believe, to a sense of what the public is interested in and what legislative body in general is interested in, with some of the modifications he's made with the accountability for this year and what will happen next year. But there is a bill, it's a bill that has been authored by a state representative who's on the education committee from El Paso, Mary Gonzalez, that would create a commission to look at this. I'm not sure that bill is going to get a hearing in public ed, but it's certainly a concept that is worthwhile, and it would get people other than staff at the education agency involved in this. Her bill contemplates a commission very similar to the one we had after the 17 session on state finance, which culminated in the Huberty-Taylor Act, House Bill 3. I mean, evidence is there that sort of commission can be highly successful if there's a true commitment to it. I think there's a commitment to doing something different. Great number of the House members, and again, I would say in your delegation, I don't know any member who says we don't need accountability. They're all very strong in their belief about the need for a meaningful accountability system. Practically every one of them has concerns about the way the system is structured right now. And these concerns range from members who are representative of some some very strong conservative perspectives to some very progressive liberal perspective. This isn't something that belongs to any one party or any one political segment on that spectrum. So I'm hopeful that eventually the weight of this, the commitment that we see from so many members will push this forward. At this point, it's hard to see at this session, and some of that has to do with the leadership. That Lieutenant Governor is very committed to the system we have in place right now. He believes that the accountability system is working well, and that we've got to have a robust state assessment to inform us about that.
Right. And there's just not enough time left. Like you said, basically we've got a couple of weeks. That if this was a priority issue, it would have been something that should have been brought up more at the beginning. And yeah, our Lieutenant Governor is very confident in the system that is discriminatory, basically. It does penalize lower socioeconomic disadvantaged populations and districts. The data is clear on that, and I just don't understand why that is not an obvious for our state leadership. But
I know Dr. Barlow's analysis, his research and analysis on Arlington ISD, what my colleague Dee Carney has done statewide, it's very clear there's a direct correspondence between the relative wealth, economic status of a student and of a campus to performance on the state assessments. That's a conclusion that just can't be denied.
Yep. It's phenomenal. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate
Yes,
it.
sir.
And, look forward to us working together fast and furious over the next few weeks as governance committee, and thank you for all you do with us.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Dr. Reich.
Thank you, Dr. Reich. I do not see any other names put up for questions. Mr. Chapa, do you have anything to say or add as chairman of our governance committee? And thank you once again for your service and your committee members, particularly during legislative sessions, although I know we stay active even when it's not. But thank you very much. If you'd like to make any comments, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, President Mays. I don't have a whole lot to add. We are in regular communication as a governance committee and our focus on legislation this time of year with Mr. Anderson, and greatly appreciate his insight. He covered all the high points that I think we would know about, want to know about, and I echo a lot of the concerns that he expressed, and we've talked about this many times from this podium, that it seems like every time the legislature meets, there's a continued erosion of local control, and we are seeing that, and concerned about it. Something that I think the public should know is that part of our advocacy efforts are we do send letters to our state legislative representatives to let our voice be heard, even at the committee stage of a bill's consideration. I think there was a direct reference by a legislator to one of the letters we sent this week, in fact.
There was.
We are trying our best to represent the interests of Arlington, the Arlington ISD community, even at a state level, even though we're down here just at a lowly school board. And so with that, I would turn it back over. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Once again, thank you very much, Mr. Anderson. We really appreciate it. And the one
Certainly.
comment that you said that I will be happy to repeat is that we are continuing to advocate for decisions that should be made closer to the learner. I think that is extremely important. So once again, thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thank
And
you.
We'll probably be talking to you in a couple hours.
Look forward to seeing you soon.
Yes, thank you. Okay, next on our agenda is our open forum for non-agenda items. Mrs. Benjamin, do we have any requesters that want to address the board? No, ma'am, we do not. Thank you very much. Then we will move on to our superintendent's report. Dr. Cavazos?
Thank you, President Mays, and a quick thank you to all our staff across the district for their continued work as we welcome more and more students that are choosing to come to face-to-face instruction. specifically at our high schools. I thank our high school staff and teachers and principals for their work on one more pivot, and that is to not have a hybrid schedule and have a 5 days a week. So I appreciate their work on that. And continued thank you to our community. We are rounding the corner on this. It certainly seems that way. And we do anticipate a more normalized end of the school year with activities, but also more normalized as we look into the future for August. So with that, just another brief time of gratitude. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cavazos. Do I have any trustees that have any reports this evening? Ms. Walton.
Thank you, President Mays. I just wanted to let everyone know this is National Library Week. And to all our highly trained teacher librarians out there and all of our Arlington schools, thank you for working so hard for our students. Our librarians are doing it all right through the pandemic, continuing to promote a love of reading for our youngest students and helping our older students acquire strong research and critical thinking skills. Trivia fact, did you know that every 2 days now, the human race creates as much information as we did from the dawn of civilization until 2003? That kind of blew my mind. Not all of this information is created equal. Some is factual, some is not. And it's really probably the most critical role of our librarians to help students navigate information and bridge the divide in the digital age through access and teaching information analysis skills. So it's wonderful that as soon as our kids learn how to get on the internet and operate it and they get that access up, it's really important they learn to learn to critically analyze all the information. Another fact, we talked a minute ago about broadband with Mr. Anderson. More than a quarter of U.S. households do not have a computer with internet access. So our libraries are a great leveler for connecting students with high-speed internet access and digital technology. We are blessed to have a school district that invests in our school libraries and professional librarians. This is an investment in our students and our community. So thank you to all of our friendly school librarians. Keep up the great work and happy National Library Week to you all.
Thank you very much, Ms. Walton. Do we have any other trustees with reports? Okay, seeing none. I just have two things that I would like to mention. First, I would like to, as president of this current board, say thank you to my trustee colleagues for the hard work that has been put in over this last 15 months and even before, but definitely for all the work that each of you have done, for bringing all of your special expertise that we've needed, from being able to read legal papers and have it summarized from individuals, to being able to have engagement within governance, our policy making, making sure that we're still continuing to stay on track for our strategic plan, because although what's been happening, we've had to address and govern per se, we're still trying to create what policies may need to be done in the future. And we're doing that all at the same time. So I just want to say thank you to my fellow board members very much for that. And then finally, since our last board meeting, someone up here in the dais had a birthday. And he does not like to draw attention to himself. So we thought we would just wait until this evening, this intimate moment up here that's being televised, archived, shown for many times to come, to just say happy birthday to Dr. Cavazos. We hope that you had a great one and that you're continuing to celebrate. And from your board, we just want to say happy birthday.
Thank you.
You are welcome, but we're going to keep it low. Yeah.
Apparently we are.
Ms. Secretary, right. Ms. Secretary, do we have any items to consider this evening?
Yes, Madam President, we have one. It was directed, I guess, to Dr. Barlow, and that is what percentage is the 6,570 students who tried to take the STAR test this week who were eligible compared to who were eligible to take the STAR last time.
Does that encompass the question, Mr. Hogg and Dr. Rush?
Is that good?
Very good.
He'll understand it. Okay.
Very good. Hopefully. Okay, that is it. It is 8:58 and this meeting is adjourned.